I'm Joanne Law, Director of Studies for Mediation Institute and co-founder of Interact Support. I'm on a mission to prevent violence by training and supporting dispute resolution practitioners. Mediation Musings is a series of conversations with mediators and for mediators. So if you're interested in dispute resolution, follow the channel. We're intending to update new recordings each week. Enjoy. Hello, today I'll be talking with Neville Starick from Cynosure.
I met Neville on LinkedIn, and one of the things that really attracted my attention was the work that you're doing around reflective practice and that sort of work, because it's something that's very, very important to mediators as well as counsellors and coaches and pretty much anyone who works as an independent professional. Within that, particularly within that confidential bubble. So can you tell me a little bit more about the type of work that you do?
Well, I'm working in a range of different spaces, actually. So, if I could put it in a nutshell, what I'm actually trying to do for people that I work with is to help them to be more aware about what exactly they're doing and how they're operating, so that they can come to their work with a whole sense of their work or their life with the whole sense of, I know what my defaults tend to be, and I can either work with them or find alternatives to them. So, and I mean, my speciality seems to be people who are going through major transition. But I mean, transition is a part of life. So we're all doing transition to some degree, but I guess that sometimes we go through transitions and it's actually quite difficult to,
So more or less, if people are getting a bit stuck and resisting things that are happening,
it could be that they're resisting it, or they're just finding that they've suddenly found themselves in a place that's more overwhelming than they expected. It's just like, well, okay, I've maybe chosen a job change or I've chosen a relocation, and I didn't actually expect the whole gamut of things that came along with that. And then they find themselves maybe a little bit overwhelmed, a little bit isolated, a little bit suddenly lacking in confidence. It's like, oh, have I made the right decision, or have I done the right thing, or I've got all these things that are out of my control and I don't know what to do. So and it's just like so I find myself working a lot with those spaces. In that space there, often with transition, there's a whole lot of grief and loss. So people have made a big change in their lives, or a big change has happened to them, and their whole world's been turned upside down, and they don't really know what they're dealing with anymore. So
look, I absolutely recognise those sort of people. We work with them in mediation all the time.
Yes. And I mean, mediation, a lot of people are in a situation where they're in a conflict. Where it's like maybe they started it, maybe they didn't, maybe it was foisted upon them, but they're kind of sitting there going, like, how do I deal with this? And it's triggering a whole bunch of stuff in me, and I'm really angry about being in this space, and I don't want to be here, and I want it resolved, and I don't know how to go about and do this successfully, because every time I try to engage in this process, it feels like there's more conflict that comes out of it. And
it can be and you know, they do get very very caught up in that, and can become quite toxic. I work in family law predominantly, so
yes
an area where things can turn very bad, very
and very volatile. Lots of very strong emotions.
Absolutely. And so do you work sort of on an individual basis with people, or group work? How do you?
I've mainly done individual work, and I tend to work with adults. I've done a little bit of work with children and with teens, but that's not really my forte. I actually feel more comfortable with adults. I'm just launching into doing a little bit of group work type of things. I've got a workshop that's focusing on anger management and how do I understand anger and work with my own anger. I've identified that there's a bit of a need here in this area, and it's also an area that I've had a little bit of interest in because of my own journey with anger. It's just like, not that anger has been a volatile thing for me, but it's just like my whole upbringing and so on. I've basically had some ideas around what anger was and what it wasn't, that actually were very unhelpful, and which meant that I stuffed down a whole lot of anger and never dealt with anything that made me angry.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I mean, it was having negative effects with my own mental health. And then periodically there would be the explosions that would happen that nobody would see coming because they didn't know what was going on for me. And so having to work through, it's like, well, I mean, I think there are a whole bunch of myths and a whole bunch of misunderstandings about what anger is going on, what anger is about. And I think one of the things that seems to be coming through fairly strongly in our society is that anger is bad. And it's like, well, actually, anger is not bad or good. It actually has a role to play, but if we need to understand why it's there, because everybody experiences anger.
Yeah.
It's what we do with it that can become problematic.
Absolutely, and the situations that we interpret as needing anger.
Yes.
Our calibration can be off a bit there.
Yes, and sort of the amount of anger that's appropriate.
Yeah, exactly. So no, that sounds interesting. So look, let me know, because we've got with the not-for-profit, we've got networks right around the country. So
Yep. And there's a possibility if I can get things sorted out with internet connection and so on, that I might be able to offer something online for people who are further away. So
look, that's helpful, particularly for people in regional areas where it's really difficult for them to get high quality support.
Very much so. And it's like the services that are provided, like, well, this is what we've got, and there isn't really a great deal of choice.
Yeah.
So if there is a choice at all.
Absolutely. So are you doing work with professionals at the moment, or mainly?
Mainly my work at the moment is focused on individuals, whether they're professional or not is kind of like not.
It's about their personal stuff.
It's about their personal stuff. I do a little bit of supervision with another counsellor at this particular point in time, but I've done a little bit of that over the last couple of years, is just supervising people that are developing their practice and so on. And that's been something that I've been quite enjoying doing, because I've been in the counselling field now for over 10 years. Gained a fair bit of experience on a number of different levels around counselling practice and just around life in general, and working with people in this mental health / wellness space. And I just found that people were coming to me. I was actually approached by both of these counsellors to say, would you be my supervisor? And I'm like, oh, that was a great honor that they saw that I had something that they wanted to work with. And it was like, oh, okay. So
that's great.
Yeah. And it is something, as I was going through preparing for our conversation, I was realizing that actually that's an area that I would like to move into more. It's like, not that I want to let go of the client work and so on, but it's just kind of like, well, working with professionals, how it brings a different nuance on the use of the counselling skills and the use of the reflective practice side of things. Because it's like, one of the things that I find with counselling is that a lot of people come in there thinking that I have to have a problem for me to access counselling. It's like, if I don't have a problem, I shouldn't be here. And it's like, well, yeah, there is some value to that, but there's also a place for doing some preventative work around, hey, let me understand myself, let me understand how I work, so that when I do come across a problem, I'm actually better prepared. And I'm not going to sit there and do things blindly or unconsciously and just react. I might actually have a little bit more power to work with who I am and not let the circumstances dictate my response.
Yeah. And look, as a practitioner, mentoring and supporting other practitioners is really powerful for your own practice, I think.
Yes. It certainly forces you to look at what you're doing yourself and say, well, okay, I'm encouraging people in this way. How do I use that?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. It does keep, I find it stops you getting complacent.
Yes. And also it keeps you looking back at your own practice. It's like, okay, what is it that I am doing? And can I articulate that to somebody else? Yes. And what's the framework that's around what I'm doing? It's like, okay, I might use a particular strategy, but I may not use it in the way that it was originally designed. So what am I actually doing and why?
Yeah,
So,
what am I doing and why? It's a
yeah.
really important question to be asking
Mm.
ourselves
Yes. Yes.
constantly, isn't it?
Mm.
So the counselling and that, if you can remember back, what what prompted you to pursue that sort of a career?
It was interesting. I started off thinking that I was going to be a school teacher, which is kind of strange. I was just, from a very, very young age, I was very passionate about being in school. And this is even before I'd started school. I quite liked the idea of being a school teacher. And I don't know if I could even articulate what it was that I liked about it, but it was just like, I sort of had that as a goal or a guiding thing from my whole school career, that I was like, I'm going to be a school teacher. And so I worked hard and I studied and I enjoyed the learning process, and went off to teachers college and struggled through that, and sort of that raised a bit of question there, because I was sitting there going, I've always been more of an individual person more than a group person. And I tend to have a fairly strong introvert preference anyway. So give me depth over breadth. Give me one-on-ones more than group type of things. So classroom teaching was actually a real struggle for me, particularly when I was learning how to be a teacher, because it was just like, I don't feel very comfortable in this space. I don't enjoy being in the group kind of stuff. It's like I'm getting, my mind is getting totally fried trying to keep tabs on 25 plus people in the room, and the very ones that I'm attracted to the most are the ones that need the most help, and I don't have the time to do this because there are too many people.
Yeah.
So, and the professional development that I was doing as a school teacher seemed to be gravitating more and more towards doing the welfare side of things and working with the children with special needs and or emotional issues or behavioural problems and so on. And that intrigued me more because it was coming back to the one-on-one type of stuff that I enjoyed doing. And I sort of had my very first teaching job. I ended up having a burnout out of it. It's like I lasted about 18 months. It was just, and some of that was me and some of that was the context. And it took me a while. It took me about a year to actually, I stepped out of teaching for a year and didn't know what I was going to do. And it was just like, I've had this very painful experience that shook my confidence in my ability to even be a teacher. And I didn't know what else I was going to do because I'd only ever focused on that. And it was like, so I had this huge experience of like, well, the rug's been ripped out from under my feet. What am I going to do now?
Yeah. So you've kind of got a void in the future where
it had been mapped out for the rest of my career. This is what I was going to do. And then I suddenly had this experience that sort of told me that maybe that's not my career path, but I didn't have any idea what I was going to do next because I hadn't really thought about other possibilities. So so I spent a year and I did other things. I ended up doing temp work and developed some other skills, and and eventually I decided I needed to check to see if teaching was actually still a viable option for me, because I mean, one of the things that had come out of the reason that I'd burned out was that I was in a situation where I was told that my performance wasn't up to par. Well, that was kind of vague, but being young and naive and quite inexperienced, I took that very personally and took that as a global assessment of my skills and abilities. And I thought, okay, after a year of being out of teaching, I thought I need to go back and find out if that was true. So I thought, I'm going to test myself. It's like, I'm going to go and do relief teaching for a little while. And the things that that I'd been told were that my organisation and my classroom discipline were poor. And I said, well, relief teaching, you need to have organisation and classroom discipline to be able to survive. And if I can't do that, then that will tell me that teaching is actually not for me.
Yeah.
Well, I did relief teaching and I did fine. I was like, I didn't. And so that kind of made me reassess a whole bunch of things about what was the context that I'd been working in, and working through a bit more of my own experience of burnout and what contributed to that, and realizing that it wasn't 100% me, and that I needed to give some credence to the fact that the context was really difficult and there was not a lot of support, and I'd been thrown in the deep end with a lot of things that I wasn't expecting, and without any real assistance to be able to handle that.
Mm.
So
Yeah, and look, from my perspective in workplace mediation, that's the situation we see a lot, where
mm,
the work environment just
mm.
isn't supportive of people as
And what
individuals to be
succeed to
okay to succeed.
succeed, yeah, and that's what I'm finding, and I'm not sure if this has been developing over time, but I'm noticing this more and more, is that you go into work situations where people expect you to hit the ground running. And it's like, well, okay, you may come in with skills and experience that might be useful and relevant, but the context actually is unknown when you've never worked there before.
Yes.
And you might go through an orientation that gives you a bit of an idea of what's going on, but you actually need somebody alongside to say, okay, this is how things work here. This is what you need to do. This is how you deal with this. I mean, case in point, I have finished a role last year that I held for a short period of time. That the role description was quite vague, and I had gone into it thinking, okay, it has some scope for me to bring in my skills and experience. And the interview was kind of like, something in me was saying is that I'm not, maybe this isn't the right fit, but I'll see what I can do with it. They offered me the job. There was some painful waiting times before the job started, and then there were more waiting times because there were things that were supposed to have been in place when I started that weren't, surrounding a new program that was going to be implemented, which wasn't ready, and so,
Yep.
and so it was just like I spent months sitting there going, what am I doing? What am I doing? And then, I mean, the manager that hired me left 3 months into my role. It had an interim manager that didn't really know what was going on. And then the final manager that I worked for started about a couple of months before I finished. And it was just like, suddenly there was clarity there. And the clarity was actually saying, this is not the role for me. But it was also highlighting that there was a whole bunch of information that was assumed that I knew.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, I'd been in the organization for a number of months, but nobody had told me or sat down with me and said, this is what the expectation are when you're doing this particular task.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm relying on what it is that I know, which turns out to be quite different from the expectation within the organization.
Yes. And then it's treated as a performance issue.
Yes. As if you have failed and you've done the wrong thing. And it's like, oh, hang on, I didn't have any information to work with, so I'm doing the best I can.
Yeah.
So,
no, it's yeah, and I guess that reflective practice. So, well, you've said that a way of describing yourself is a reflective counsellor / educator.
yes, yes.
What does that mean?
Well, it basically means that I'm not just about what I do. Let me think very carefully about how I phrase this. I'm not just a doer.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I can do the counselling, I can do the educating and so on. But what I am actually doing is I'm actually noticing how I'm going about doing that and what's the response to that and whether or not I've actually worked effectively with the people in front of me or the person or the people in front of me. And then thinking about, well, what contributed to that working well or not working so well, and what might I need to tweak if I were in a similar situation in the future. So the reflection is sort of it's an ongoing thing. It's funny, I've described it to some of my clients about, I'm sitting here working with you and I'm trying to be very present with you so that you're getting my full attention. But in the back of my head, I'm also looking at me and what's going on and what am I noticing and what am I picking up in my body? What am I thinking about? And it's like I've got these two things going on simultaneously during the work.
Yeah, look, I completely understand. I'm
Yeah.
one of my things is I'm an NLP master practitioner,
Yes.
and you're describing that you're probably auditory digital in your wiring, and so
Yes.
you tell yourself what you're experiencing rather than experiencing directly in some ways.
Well, I think I think what's actually happening is that both are happening.
Yes.
It's one of those things. It's one of those things that I'm here in the moment, and I'm actually somehow able to be completely
Yes.
here for this person that's in front of me. And at the same time, there is another part of me that's actually being an observer around, like, what's going on in this interaction? What's
Yes.
going on in this interaction, and what do I need to pay attention to? Because that can either guide me in what I do immediately in the context, or what I might do in the future, and so on. So, yeah.
Yeah, and look, that's a skill that
Mm,
mediators have to develop,
yeah,
because
counsellors do too.
certainly for us, because we've got one person's reality and their belief about the situation, and the other person's reality and their belief
Mm,
about the situation. They don't gel, and then as the mediator, we're sitting from another perspective, and then
yes,
we're thinking
yes.
about how how we're going to help guide these people to greater
Mm,
understanding. So
yeah, yeah.
yeah, a lot of those skills that you use in counselling, the active
Mm,
listening, the reflection, all of
mm,
those things are the
absolutely.
same
Mm,
for us as mediators.
mm.
And one of the things, in mediation, as you pointed out, our focus is on reaching agreement. I guess counselling, it's more deeply on that understanding.
Yeah, the understanding of self, and also just the interpretations that people are making about what it is that they are experiencing. It's like, and challenging that if it needs to be challenged. Okay, it feels like this. It feels
Mm.
like I'm being attacked by X, Y, and Z, but I'm wondering if they might be coming from a different place,
Yes. Yeah.
and their response to you may not be about you. And so
Yeah.
for some people, that can be a huge shift. It's just like,
Oh,
oh, it's not that personal. Maybe it's. I mean,
yeah.
do they and
Absolutely.
yeah.
And look, for some people, they really don't understand perspective. They don't understand that
Mm,
someone else can think differently to them, and that doesn't
yeah.
mean they're lying. It seems, well, this is what's true, and so if you think differently, you're lying. You're not
Yes.
really
Yes.
thinking differently. You're just saying that. And you talked about the mind, body, emotion connection.
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you
Yeah. The
expand?
mind, body, emotion. It's funny because it's. I'm going to make some gross generalizations here that may not apply to everybody, but I'm looking at society as a whole, and Western society probably in general, is that we have this whole sense of we split. We've
Mm,
got our mind over here, our body over here, and any other thing that we might choose to call a soul or anything like that. And we see them all as very separate. And
yes.
that's sort of a product of Greek thinking and so on. And that has its place. But what happens here is that we get engaged in something and we forget about our body. We forget that our body actually has something to say to us, and we don't know how to interpret its signs. So we do a lot of ignoring of what's going on with the body. And what I have learned as I've done the counsellor training and as I've worked with people is that um, the mind and the body and whatever else that you choose to define as the person, they're not discrete, separate items. You don't sit there and say, I'm going to work with my body, or I'm going to work with my emotions, or I'm going to work with
Yeah.
my thoughts. It's like they're interrelated, and they overlap, and they influence each other. So
Yeah.
it's like, I found with a number of my clients that a lot of the work that I've been doing is to get them to get in touch with their body, because their body is actually telling them a whole bunch of stuff that would give them information that would help them to keep situations from getting to crisis point.
Yeah.
So if they understood the signals, if they recognized the signals early, they could do something differently,
Yeah.
instead of getting to a point where the body is now screaming at you to say, it's like, this is a terrible situation, you need to do something about it, and then it becomes a big anger fest type
Yes.
of thing, because it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. No, look, I totally understand.
yeah,
I've done a fair bit of work with people with anger, and yeah,
yeah,
being recognizing the physical triggers once they start
yep.
before they become overwhelmed and unable to control
And
themselves.
even the stuff with stress. I mean, before the stress becomes a health issue,
Yes.
if you're recognizing how your body responds to difficult situations, then you can prepare for it. Then you then have a better idea of, like, well, what do I need now? Because
Mm,
my body's saying, oh, okay, I'm feeling a tightness in my chest. I'm not breathing very well.
yeah.
I'm sitting there and I can't sleep, and my appetite is changed. changed. It's either I'm eating too much or eating too little. It's like, okay, now I need to deal with some of the emotional things that are contributing to all of that. And maybe I also need to then also address some of the thinking that's kind of saying I can't do anything about this. So and so it all kind of works together, but sometimes what people have learned to do, and we do it very easily in our society, is to sit there and we push through pain, we push through stress, we ignore our hunger and our appetite, we ignore all of those kind of things, and we do it for too long.
Yes.
And so therefore the body is now dealing with a stress of like, I've been ignored, I've got needs that haven't been met. And then people are wondering, well, I don't feel very well. It's like, I don't understand it. It's like, well, I mean, what's going on here are you taking care of your body? Because your body is there to support you. And if you're not listening to what your body's saying, then it's going to have a knock-on effect with how you feel and how you think.
And then we end up with the chronic disease. And if you look at the word dis-ease.
Yes, exactly. That's an emotional thing. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So it's like, I'm not comfortable in this space, and my body is telling me that I'm not comfortable in this space. So why am I ignoring that?
Yeah, that's right. So, and look, from the perspective of a mediator, for me, the ideal situation would be that all of our clients are working with a counsellor to help them to be more aware of their needs and how to support themselves.
And also how to say, I actually can't deal with this right now.
Yeah.
I'm finding that I'm just so triggered right now that I'm not going to be able to make much sense, or I'm not going to be able to participate appropriately in this process. I need a timeout or something.
Absolutely.
So I can regain control of myself.
Yeah. And that's certainly something that I talk with my clients, where particularly if I know they've got trauma, describe, this is what's going to happen. Are you going to be able to cope with that? How are you going to know when you need a break? How are you going to tell me if you need a break? Because sometimes for people where they have had trauma, they're very worried about speaking up or how they're going to appear or whatever. Making sure they have permission.
It's interesting that, because as I'm preparing for this anger management course, one of the things that I'm actually doing is I am having an interview with the people who intend to join the course. And I'm not guaranteeing that they get in, because I actually want some information to decide whether or not they're going to be appropriate for the group context, what their experience is with the anger. Yeah, that whole thing of like, okay, we're going to go into group situation, we're going to be talking about anger, we're going to be working with stories around anger. How are you going to deal with that?
Yes.
And what will happen if you find anger shows up for you in the middle of a session? What are you going to do to keep yourself safe, to keep the people in the group safe, to keep any people outside of the group that you're connected with safe? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to have in place so that anger is not going to be a reactive thing? It's like you will recognize that it's there, you will actually deal with it better. And I mean, in some respects, this is the beginning of the strategies that I'm getting people to start to develop. It's like, well, what are you going? Let's pre-plan.
That's what I was thinking as I was listening. You're pre-tasking them. You're actually giving them evidence that they can do that. So when you, that's great.
Yeah.
And I think it's just basic respectful practice with people, isn't it?
It is, and it's a lot of modeling. It's like, okay, I might be upset, or I might be angry, but this is how I deal with it.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's like, and I'm anticipating in the group context that there might be situations where it might be appropriate to actually disclose, hey, I'm really struggling with this, and I'm feeling like my own emotions coming up. Now, I'm letting you know because this has the potential. This gives you information to maybe have a look at how you're reacting here, and is there anything that you can change? But ultimately, it's my feeling.
Yeah.
And I need to own that it's mine, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault that I'm feeling this necessarily.
Yes,
but I need you to be aware that, hey, I'm really struggling.
Yeah.
Right? So
and look, it's a really important area that people need to learn more about. I know because I've done some work with anger with people, and one person, he was saying, his wife, when they're having an argument, his wife would say, if you walk out that door, that's it, it's over, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And, people need to know if someone's really angry, they need
Yeah.
to walk out that door
Yeah.
for a
Yes. So it's like, what are the strategies? Do I need the timeout? And it's getting people to sit there and plan that out ahead of time. It's like, okay, I might be going into a volatile situation for me.
Yes.
So I need to know what I'm going to do. And I also need to know how to communicate that to the other people so that they don't misinterpret.
Yeah, because the interpretation is you're running away, you're not going to deal with this, we need to get this thrashed out, I want this sorted now.
Yes. And then personality preferences come into that too. It's just like, okay, here you have an extrovert that wants to talk it all out right now, and here's the introvert that says, I need to think about it because this is big stuff, and this is big stuff, and I don't want to give a light answer, I want to give a considered response. And the clashes there around that can be quite amazing itself.
Yeah, and even understanding those basic dynamics of introversion and extrovert. So I'm also naturally a very introverted person, and so it can become just really overwhelming.
They've got too much information to sift through, and I can't work out what I think. So yes. We kind of started on the question of how I got into the counselling space. We never quite finished that. So we didn't. Shall we go back to that?
Absolutely. That'd be
So I mean, I had this experience of the teaching role that didn't work, and I went back and I had a year out, and then I went back and I tried it again and realized that actually I did have the skills. I could actually do what I needed to do in the teaching space, and so I stayed in there for a little bit longer, but it really wasn't the right fit anymore. It was just kind of like, I don't think this is really what I want to do for the rest of my life. And the way education was moving, it was just like, it was becoming less and less what I wanted to do. So I was finding myself, even before I went into the teaching type of thing, I was the kind of person that would sit there and would listen to people. Wouldn't necessarily say much myself, but would listen to people. And I would always have people, or constantly have people, telling me stuff that could just surprise me. It's like, why did you tell me that? It's just like, and what am I supposed to do with it? And this is something that's actually really, really big stuff that I'm sure not everybody knows.
Yeah.
So, wow, they trusted me to tell me that. But I don't know what to do with it. And that kind of went on. In the year out from teaching, I explored the possibility of doing some kind of study into the counselling space, but I was quite young still, and I thought, I don't feel like I'm actually ready for that. But I did continue to find myself in situations where people just kept telling me stuff, and seemed to be quite happy to download and offload and dump whatever it is, whatever term it is that you want to put on that, and it would be very unexpected, and sometimes yielded some very unexpected responses to me, because people thought, oh, you've heard my story and you like me, and sort of like, well, I'm not quite sure if I would go that far, but yes.
I'm not going to run screaming from you, never to have anything to do with you.
So
they no doubt feared if people actually saw them.
Yes, so there's something there about hearing their story and accepting the person for who they are. Somehow I seem to do that fairly easily. Now, the only thing that I can think of that might contribute to that is the fact that as a child, I had lived overseas for a while. We'd moved quite a number of times, and had the experience of actually seeing people in many, many different cultural contexts. And probably there were a lot more cultural contexts I could have been involved in it. So I'm not saying that I've experienced everything, but I experienced a range of different things, and people from different ethnic backgrounds, people from different ages, people from different countries, different accents, just recognizing that there was just a huge variety of people, and they're all different, and they're all different in a way that wasn't good about it, just that was the way they were. And I was curious about the differences, and I was intrigued that you'd have two people in the same family and they would be very different people.
Yeah.
You get people that were going in the same classroom in school, and they would have very different interests, and their interests were different from mine, and yet somehow we could still connect, and sometimes we couldn't. And yeah, so it was all very very fascinated from a very early age about the differences in people. Yeah, and had opportunities as a younger adult to begin to explore that. Some of my teaching studies delved into some of the differences that you get in an educational context, and I had opportunities to do some self-reflection then on some of my own experience. And I had a great paper that I wrote, a psychology paper that I wrote in my education degree, where I looked at the impact of my experience of living in a country that was not my parents' home country, and how that affected me growing up, and how I saw the world, and so on. And so that was a hugely it was an amazing assignment to write for me, because I'd never done that level of reflection before, and here I had this opportunity to write about it and to really delve into it and look at theories that might contribute to this, and so on. So that was kind of that took the interest up another level at that point.
No, look, it's a really important reflection, because sometimes Australians can be intolerant of just how challenging it is to live in another culture. I lived in Chile for 4 years, so
all right, yes.
I've got as an adult, but I've got that experience of
habla español.
Sí, habla perfectamente. Because you have to learn, because it gets a bit much just being able to speak to your husband.
Yes.
Yeah, so understanding, I guess having insights into the diversity of people set your brain on a certain pathway.
Yeah, and it's just that the curiosity has never really gone away. It's like I will sit there with people, and there's always little thoughts running in my head. I wonder why they do that. I wonder what they're doing. And I mean, it was funny, the reaction when I finally went and did my counselling.
Yeah,
my family members are going, "You're not going to psychoanalyze me, are you?" And it's just like I had all these people that got really scared about, like, well, now I don't know how to talk to you, because I don't know what you're going to do with that, because you're now training to be a counsellor. And it's like, well, you talked to me before, just do what you did before.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's just like
I've always been thinking things about you, so I don't. Yeah, look, that's actually something I wanted to talk to you about. Often we find it difficult, when we're working with a client, we might think, I think you'd benefit from some counselling, some reflection, maybe some strategies that would work. But we, can find a fair bit of resistance, particularly with the men.
Yes.
Any tips that mediators might be able to use?
I was coming up. I encountered this when I was trying to promote my counselling practice when I was up in Brisbane, and one of the things that I found was precisely that issue. It's like, how do you encourage people to take the step to explore counselling as an option?
Yeah.
And so on, and it might be glaringly obvious that from the outside that they've got a problem, but A, they might not see it, or B, they might see it but they're really embarrassed about it, and they don't actually want people to highlight it.
Okay, so do you think it's embarrassment is one of the reasons?
It's a possible option. Yeah. So it's like, well, yeah, I don't want to talk about it because it's too difficult. It's too difficult for me, and I feel like
I feel bad when talking about it.
I'm failing in this area, and I don't want you to highlight it.
Okay. Yeah.
So there could be a bit of that, a bit of embarrassment, a bit of shame, and depending upon what exactly has happened and what kind of behaviours they're exhibiting, they could be oblivious. They're just kind of like, I have no idea what impact I'm having on other people and the way that my behaviour is having on other people. I'm just, and
it's their problem. Why can't they accept me the way I am?
Yeah. So there is that, but there's also the whole sense of like not a great deal of insight. It's just like, well, I don't know what's going on. So I ended up coming up with this acronym to begin to help people to broach that ice in reverse, because too often we sit there and we go head on and say, you need counselling, and people immediately freeze and say, no, I don't. and you
Mm.
get the defensiveness going on. What I did is I reversed the words for ICE, and I said one was, the first thing you needed to do is you needed to start with empathy. You needed to empathize where they're at and what's going on for them.
Yep.
So, I mean, as mediators and counsellors, we often do that fairly easily, but not everybody recognises what empathy is. They sit there and go straight to solution mode.
Yes.
So it's like, yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yep, it's
And
absolutely something I have to drum out of our students.
yes. So it's the solution is the end of the line, not the beginning. Yes. And you may not get to the end of the line, so don't marry yourself to getting to a solution. So
Yeah.
so it's like you got to start with the empathy, because the empathy then builds connection.
Mm.
So it's because they'll sit there and say, this person actually cares about me, they have an interest in me, they're invested in me. You started off with your empathy, which formed connection, which then gave you the opportunity to give an invitation. And the invitation might sound something like this. It's like, you're going through all of this and it sounds like it's really, really, really difficult. And I'm hearing how difficult it is for you. And you might want to elaborate on that so that you really, it's very,
Yeah,
very
they
clear
can
that
see
you've
that you
heard.
understand.
Yeah, and that you've
Yeah.
picked up what their circumstances and situations are like for them.
Mm.
Okay, so and then the invitation would come probably in the form of a question. So it's just like, oh, do you think it would be helpful to talk to somebody about this?
Mm.
And not mention the word, the counselling word,
Yep.
and sort of not even put it in that kind of frame. So do you think it would be, or you could even say, do you have anybody that you talk to about these things? They sound like they're really difficult issues. And again, you might then get some more information then. Oh, no, yes, I talk to X, Y, and Z. It's like, okay, are you finding that helpful? Or if it's like, no, I don't talk to anybody because I don't know who I would talk to. It's like, and then your invitation would be, would it be helpful to connect with, to have somebody to talk to?
Yeah.
And again, they then start making the decision whether or not they want to do that. If they say no, you just drop it.
Yeah.
Okay. But if they say yes, that then gives you an opening to sit there and say, well, who would you be comfortable talking to? And again, it's drawing from them who they might see might be a useful person to talk to. And if they've got no ideas, is have you ever thought about doing a little bit of work with a counsellor?
Yep.
And you might have to demystify some of that, because people immediately go, I'm not that sick.
Yeah.
But I don't need that.
That's right. Are you
It's like, I'm really not crazy. All sorts
Yeah.
of things. So it's just like, and you might have to then unpack the thing around counselling and say, well, actually, counselling's not just for when you're not doing for when you're crazy. And there is some counselling that is for people who are going a bit crazy, but it can also be for when you're for people who are in very difficult situations, and like yourself, you don't know who to talk to, and to help just unpack it with somebody who doesn't know you or your situation. They're outside of it. They don't have any reason to tell you to do one thing or another, but they can also help you to look at the things that are going well, that will help you to be able to manage your situation differently, and maybe in a way that's better.
Yeah.
And so it's just planting seeds, and it just depends on their responses as to how far you take it. So, but until you've built the rapport and the connection with the empathy, they're not going to accept anything that will be offered, because it's like, I don't have a problem.
Yeah, you're judging me.
You're judging me, this, that, the other. But you don't get what my life's like. You're just trying to fix me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, look, that's great. I think people will find that really helpful, because as mediators, we want to help people. We want to get them into the services that that will help them. But yes, if we don't approach it in the right way,
and I mean, it's just you follow the lead of the person in front of you. It's like, if they don't want to talk about it, you say, okay, I'm just letting you know that I am aware that things might be really difficult for you, and if you feel that you would like to be connected with somebody to talk to about what you're going through, talk to me, and I will see what I can do.
Yeah,
so that they know.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things, there's a tendency to treat counselling and mediation as if it's a generic thing, that it doesn't matter who you talk to, every counsellor is the same.
Yeah, no, not true at all.
Not at all.
True. And one of the things I do when I meet new clients for the first time is I give them permission to fire me. It's like basically, if you're not connecting with me, if you're feeling like this isn't doing what you need it to do, if you're not finding it helpful, then maybe we need to look at connecting with somebody else, because I might not be the right person for you.
Yeah.
Okay. And I very rarely had to do anything with that, but it's just letting people know. It's just like, hey, I'm not the counsellor for everybody. It's like, and it's not a failure on your part if this doesn't work for you. It's not a failure on my part necessarily, although I am more responsible in this situation. But it's it just means that we haven't got the right relationship to be able to do the work that you need to do, and maybe I don't have the right skills to be able to work with what it is that you do. So we need to connect you with somebody who is the right person for you, or you need to have permission to go and find that person.
Yeah.
And it's okay if you don't find that person the first time.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
no, that's great. Yeah, but it's so important to pre-frame for people to help them manage their expectations when they're
yes,
in a new situation that they,
absolutely, yeah.
you know, I guess it goes back to what you were talking about, you know, back in those jobs. You know, it's really important for the people that know more about the situation to help manage, you know, so that people
People who
can
knew, yes, yeah,
yeah. it's
yes.
it's funny how things go back in circles, isn't it?
Isn't it? Isn't it just?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess, look, and I'm aware of time. The other thing I just wanted to ask you about is something that you mentioned about the importance of focusing on what you want rather than what you don't want.
Yeah, there's some interesting research out there around neuropsychology, which is like the connection between the nervous system, the brain, and um, and behavior. I'm hoping that I'll be able to quote this correctly, but from what I understand is that the brain is wired for action. Okay, so the brain wants to be able to say, we're going to do something. It does not cope with, we're not going to do something. It doesn't really know what to do with that. So it's just kind of like, well, okay, if I'm not going to do something, what am I actually going to do? And so what it does is that actually, if you're saying that I'm not going to drink. Well, the only action that the brain can get out of that statement is drink.
Yeah.
It's like the not drinking actually doesn't really compute. And so it's just like, well, okay, you want us to focus on drinking? Well, we can do that. So
That's easy.
And the brain will accommodate. And suddenly you find yourself thinking about drinking all the time. You find yourself moving into situations that you drinking is actually becomes a problem. And it's like, well, hang on, I'm trying to stop this. And it's like, well, the brain hasn't worked out what the replacement action is.
Exactly.
So it doesn't intuitively work it out. And of course, so you got the thing about the synapses in the brain that they're basically, if you wire them together, they fire together. So here you are saying, I'm not thinking about drinking. And where does the brain go? It's like, bing, we're thinking about drinking. We're thinking about drinking. There's an action, we can do that. And it just becomes the loop unless you have something specific that you have named that you are going to do instead. So, I mean, classic example, you tell children, don't run. How often do children struggle with that? So, I mean, if you tell them walk, they know what the expectation is. They have a better idea of what it is that they need to be doing. And that, I mean, as adults, we're not that much more sophisticated. We just hide it better.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of like, okay, if I'm wanting to prevent or get rid of a behavior or change how I do things, then I need to have a very clear idea about what it is that I want to do instead. And it frustrates me quite a lot because there's a whole lot of push in our society around, we want to get rid of bullying, we want to get rid of discrimination.
Yeah, that's
But
right. We need to focus on civility and respect and the behaviours we
all
want.
that kind of stuff. And so it's just like, I feel like we are actually working against our own physiology and our own neuropsychology by having this focus that's always on the stuff that we want to get rid of. It's like, if we spent more time focusing on the things that we actually wanted and named those, we probably wouldn't have anywhere near the issue that we're having with bullying and so on, because that's just getting all the attention.
Yeah, Absolutely. And the same thing with family violence. What
Yes.
are supportive families like? What's a
Yes.
respectful relationship? What are how do
Yes.
you do that? How
Yes.
do you disagree respectfully and not
Yeah.
attacking it? You were talking around focus and making sure, or helping people to focus on what they want rather than avoiding what they don't want. And
Mm.
that certainly gels with my training as well with
Mm.
the NLP. Yeah, the classic example they use in that is don't think about the blue tree.
Yes. Yes.
You
Yes.
can't not think about something without thinking
Yeah.
about it.
Yes.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really important message to get out. It's certainly something that I see with clients coming into mediation. They're really just focused on that, away from motivation of what they don't want,
Yes. Yes.
and so part of our role as a mediator is to help them to articulate to each other what it is that they do want, how they
Yes.
want to be treated.
Yes. Yes. Mm.
And sometimes that can be really difficult for people to
Yeah.
articulate.
Yeah, because it's so much about a feeling, and it's not about a specific action.
Yeah, you can't
So
give another person these are the complete instructions of how you are to behave around me. That's not what we're
yes.
talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm.
But I'm a trainer, so it's no good for me to say to someone, stop doing that. I need to be able to tell them, do this instead. That's
Mm.
because this is going to get you this sort of result. The
Yeah.
reason
Yeah.
we're doing it, so that
Yeah. Yeah.
once people understand, then it's easy to do.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
We know something, then we can do it. But if we're just
Yeah.
trying to follow some instructions without really understanding why,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
and I guess
Mm.
that's part of the benefit of counselling, because
Mm.
people can really get that depth of understanding of why maybe an alternative approach might
Mm.
help.
And it's interesting. It's interesting because also people have an opportunity in that safe space to actually try some things
Mm.
that they might not have done before. I had a memorable client situation where we'd had the end of the session, and for some reason I wasn't able to offer the client the regular appointment time that we'd always been doing.
Mm.
And I don't know quite how this happened. I have this feeling that I didn't communicate things very clearly as to why that was the case. But the client got really upset and stormed out of the room.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going,
What just happened?
what just happened here? What I thought I said was that I am going on holidays and I won't be available for that particular date. That would have been the next time that I would see you. But I don't know what happened. And so the client stormed out of the room and then came back at the next session, which I wasn't quite sure if that was even going to happen. But the client came back,
Yeah.
and sort of thought, well,
What happened?
I was very tentative about it because I thought, oh, the client came in with a cup of coffee for me, which is also, oh no, you're trying to,
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on with that. So I didn't touch the coffee, but it
Yeah.
was just like, but yeah, sitting there exploring with the client. Okay, you left very, very angry. Do you want to talk about that? And the client was like, oh, I'd rather not. And it's just like, well, if we don't deal with this, it's going to be sitting here underneath what happens with any work that we do from now on. So can I tell you what I saw? And so on. And so I went and described what I'd seen. I didn't talk about what I had taken this to supervision, I think, because I had been like, I don't know what's going on. I'm really angry at this client because this client won't even let me have a holiday. And had to work through that for myself before I got to this interaction. But it's just like, I sit there going, okay, the client, this is what I saw. Can you tell me a little bit about what you were thinking? And as it turned out, the client unpacked that they had walked through a similar situation, but not with a counsellor, but in a completely different sphere, where they had somebody that they were meeting with regularly. I think it was a hairdresser. And if I remember correctly. And the hairdresser started rescheduling all their appointments and eventually had no space for her.
Yeah.
And now I had to take that as that was the client's experience, but I'm sitting there going, okay, so this is what you thought was happening here. And she's going, yeah, okay. And so then I had to backtrack and see, what did I actually say? Because I'm not sure how she arrived at that conclusion. It's like, well, what did you hear? What did you hear that I said?
Yeah.
And And it's like, okay. And then I said, well, actually, what was happening here? And she repeated back something that I'm sure I wouldn't have said, but it's just like, okay, what I was actually trying to tell you was that I had arranged holidays for that particular day, so I couldn't actually give you an appointment on that day because I wasn't going to be here. And so it was like, oh, really? And it was just like, yeah. And that sort of, do you see how you jump to conclusions about what was going on and the emotions got hooked in? And I mean, and I'm not sure that we unpacked it to that degree, but it was just like this whole insight of like, my interpretation was totally off the wall.
Yeah, it wasn't
like,
that I don't like
it
you,
didn't have
I'm
any,
trying to get rid of you. It's,
yeah. Which was like, okay, and it's okay, and it was interesting. And then it was just like at the end of the session, it was like, it must be really hard for you to go and set up holidays. I said, yes.
Oh, that's great. What a great and reminder for her. We are such meaning, we're pattern matches.
Yes,
that's how our brains work. It saves us
absolutely
time.
yes. And I mean, and I had to look at my own patterns that were going on there, and it's like, I was going into client blaming mode. It was just like, it was like, this is like let me tell you what's really going on, because you've totally got it wrong, and I don't know why you're upset. It's just like, no, I had to hold myself back, and it's just like, okay, let's find out where the client's coming from, and then we'll work with that. And so so in some respects there was the modeling of like, here's me holding myself. And I'm not sure, I maybe even said to the client, it's like, I didn't know what to do with that. I was actually really confused and actually a little bit angry because I didn't know what was happening, and didn't know why I was getting this response. And but even that whole transparency was like, okay, I can talk about being angry without expressing that anger in a way that's destructive to you.
That is very, very important to model that, and it's another skill that we need to do as mediators. We need to demonstrate active listening, cooperative communication, and all of those things. Often clients don't have those. No, they're not used to that.
And I think you're really weird when you start talking in particular ways. What? What do you mean? What do you mean? What's that like for me? It's just like, I just told you, didn't I? It's like, well, you told me something, but let's delve a little deeper.
Exactly. It's those follow-up questions, and I've noticed as we've been talking that you do that really well. Of when you were providing a couple of examples of talking with the client, of not taking their first answer. And just interpreting your meaning, but actually asking the second question that identifies their meaning.
Yes. So it's a challenging, holding assumptions at bay. Like, okay, I might be making an assumption, but I don't know if it's valid, so I need to hold it and get more information.
That's critical learning for anyone that's working as we do as professionals. With other people as mediators, counsellors,
any kind of community service, people helper.
Exactly, because it's quicker making assumptions, but it's not more accurate, and it's certainly not better.
Definitely not better, and often creates more problems than it solves.
So look, I'm really grateful for the time that you've given to share with us today. Is there any kind of final point or anything that you'd like the listeners to perhaps take away?
I guess one of the things that I would just like the listeners to take away is that it's not a thing of shame to go and access help with counselling, and actually it can be to your best benefits to be able to find your best self. I guess it gives you an opportunity to find your best self. So it's like, I guess what I'm doing here is reframing the whole perception that counselling has a negative stigma attached to it. It's like, and mediation, it's like, it doesn't have to be a last resort thing.
No.
It's like, and actually it can be a preventative action that keeps you from getting to crisis points. So
absolutely, and certainly something that themselves should be considering if they're feeling they're getting triggered or stressed, whether it's counselling or supervision. For Mediation Institute, people just ringing me up or one of the other mentors and just talking it through, which is which is what we offer as well for people. We need to talk things through sometimes to make sense.
We do, and sometimes we need to talk it through so that we understand what we're thinking and what we're experiencing, because sometimes the emotions crowd out the words and we don't get any sense of what actually is going on.
Yeah.
We just know we don't want to do it again.
Exactly. So look, thank you once again. What I'll be doing when I put this recording up, I'll also create a link to your profiles on LinkedIn and Facebook if people want to connect with you or find out about how they can work with you.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.